we are going to have much higher food prices, much more shrinkflation at the grocery store and at restaurants, and also higher fertilizer going forward because of bad government policy and also because of lack of investments in CapEx, which is investments in growth and maintaining property, plant, and equipment on the supply side for these different agricultural commodities for so long. So before the Ukraine war, there was already around half a dozen governments, maybe more, that were banning exports of fertilizer, banning exports of agricultural commodities, and focusing, for whatever reasons, probably to help maintain food prices and food supply in their own domestic economies, preventing exports of key agricultural inputs and also soft agricultural commodities, and also banning exports or reducing exports before the Ukraine war. And now with the Ukraine war, actually Russia anticipated a lot of this, and a month ago, before the war happened in early February, they actually announced that they were banning fertilizer exports through at least April. And now I believe those commodities export bans have been extended. They haven't announced all the details yet. It's probably going to be even longer than that. And then recently, in the last week to 10 days, Ukraine announced that they're banning exports of key agricultural commodities like wheat, oats. And then to counter this, you have governments like Iraq, and they panic bought, I think, 3 million tons or something like that of wheat reserves to stockpile. The reason that they bought that many wheat reserves to stockpile is very similar to what happened during the Arab Spring. These governments are worried about their citizens. What happens if food prices go too high too quickly, or there are shortages of food? And similar policies also just came out in the last week with Argentina. Argentina just banned exports of soy meal. So over the last 12 months, around half a dozen different fertilizer exporters, some in Eastern Europe, I think Norway might have also banned fertilizer exports. And then a month ago it was Russia, I think now it's Ukraine. All of these fertilizing exporter countries, they're not sending out the fertilizer. So the world is scrambling for new and safe sources of fertilizer supply. But that is going to hurt farmers, that is going to hurt the consumer, especially small business owner farmers that are not going to be able to deal with all these rapidly rising cost increases. I actually put a screenshot there where a farmer was interviewed last month on Fox News, and he literally itemized all of his different cost increases, 6 different ones, and they were up enormously, way more than the official US government consumer price index number and the US government producer price, or PPI, number of which is around 10% on an annualized basis. So his cost increases, his lowest cost increase was almost 19% in a year for fertilizer, and that was the lowest one. A lot of his other cost increases were up way, way more than that. Labor, many other inputs. So you are going to see, barring a miracle, barring total demand destruction, total demand collapse for many different types of food and collapse in demand for protein, you are going to see much higher prices for input costs to make food, whether that is for plants or animal feed. Finally, if you like content like this and want to help keep content like this free so it doesn't all end up behind a paywall, or you want far more in-depth content research, financial education, and analysis than I provide in these short little free videos, there are now over 200 articles and audio podcasts behind the paywall exclusive for patrons, all for only $5 a month. I think it is one of the best deals out there. And just in the last 32 or so weeks, there are now 46 new articles and audio podcasts on a lot of interesting topics about global macro companies and sectors, uranium audio podcasts about the uranium market, oil and natural gas stock articles about precious metal royalty and streaming companies, gold miners, silver miners. It's behind the paywall, all for only $5 a month. So please check that out. So if I could wrap up this short little video very quickly, there are really bad policies here from governments. The governments are focused on protecting domestic industries, on making sure their citizens have ample food supply, and this is causing enormous problems with the global food supply, which is just-in-time inventory. For example, a large Brazilian farmer, say a Bunge in Brazil, they need normally fertilizer imports from Russia, and Russia was, before this war in Ukraine, before the export ban on fertilizer started in February, Russia was the world's largest fertilizer exporter. Now, if you're a Brazilian farmer who plants soybean, corn, wheat, other crops in Brazil, you have to find your fertilizer elsewhere. You're probably going to have to pay more, or you're not going to be able to plant. And then there's going to be even worse food supply shortages. There's going to be even higher food prices if the farmers have to pay higher prices for the fertilizer. So all these things are going through the supply chain right now. Farmers that used to be able to source their inputs from certain countries are scrambling. You have new export bans in just the last couple weeks from Argentina, from Ukraine, on banning wheat, on banning soy meal, on banning oats. I think Ukraine has banned wheat and oats, and Argentina just announced in the last week or so they're banning soy meal for export bans. And then you have around a half a dozen different countries that have banned fertilizer exports in the last 12 months. So bad policies combined with a lack of investment on the supply side, because everyone prior to the last 12 months expected a lot of the normal global food supply chain. They didn't have to diversify their inputs. If you were a Brazilian farmer, you didn't have to get your fertilizer from Canada, from the US. You didn't have to source it from multiple places. You could just import it from Russia. Well, now if you're a Brazilian farmer and you used to get all of your fertilizer from Russia and there's an export ban, you're going to have to source it from somewhere else. You're probably going to have to pay more. It's going to take more time. It's going to take more capital. It's just creating an enormous mess in the global food supply chain. And what that means for restaurant owners, what that means for consumers at the grocery store and at the restaurant, is higher food prices, more shrinkflation, and potential shortages.